Hello and welcome to the Long Talk here on New Zealand Sports Radio. And we're in for a treat today because we're going to have someone that has been behind the scenes for a whole bunch of sporting successes for New Zealand over the last 18 years or so. And somebody you may not know or recognise, even though he has been there in the background. Unfortunately, that's not what we've got him on here to talk about today, though, because he's got a new project which we'll talk about. But we'll skim through those bits to start off with. Jamie Tout, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Paul. It's a pleasure.
So, Sports Performance Director at the New Zealand Campus of Innovation and Sport is your current title. But what's your first sporting memory, be it playing or watching?
Wow, that's a good one, mate. I started off playing across a whole wide range of sports, and probably my fondest memories as a kid was barefoot running down the club athletics track every Friday night. There's one thing, you get to the end of the school week, and as much as you're excited that school had finished, you're probably more excited that it was athletics night. And I know my dad particularly was right into his athletics, and I always took a lot of pride sort of trying to knock off his local records as we're going through the system. But yeah, I think back then playing a lot of tennis, a lot of cricket, a lot of rugby league back in Australia particularly, and I coached and played a lot of tennis. And I think if there was 8 days in a week, I would have been playing sport 8 days a week. But as it was 7 days a week pretty much.
So did you, when you talk about trying to get not knock off your dad's local records and things, did you get to did you sort of represent your state or did you get any sort of level of sporting achievement?
Yeah, look, over in Australia it's a little bit different. So we have provinces not dissimilar. So I was a good provincial athlete, but I probably had more success in cricket and tennis, to be fair. But yeah, I did manage to knock off the old man's 1,500 metre record. And if you ask me what it was, I can't tell you. I just know that I beat his time. But yeah, more success in tennis and cricket was probably my gig at that stage.
And I see you took you went through and got yourself physical education bachelor, and then there's a big gap in your LinkedIn profile of about a decade before we see you arrive at the Pulse. So, what were you, international drugs dealer or international playboy? What were you up to for that kind of decade?
There was an international component to that. So, look, the week before I started university at the Australian College of Phys Ed, I wasn't actually set in stone what I was going to be studying, and it was a phone call, I think, on a Tuesday. And I know it was sort of earlier in the week because by the weekend I was down doing an interview with the college, and they'd seen my phys ed grades, and they said, look, not sure if you've considered your options, but would be keen to say hello. So yeah, that weekend went down to the Australian College of Physical Education in Homebush, which was exciting at the time because it was when a lot of the Olympic facilities were getting built, and went through the interview process, the fitness testing and the like, and it was only, like I say, within the course of a week that I decided that I was going there, and a couple of weeks later I was moving into into some accommodation. As I was going through, I knew I wanted to be in sport, but wasn't that clear necessarily on what path I was going to take, whether that was in biomechanics, sports science, as a coach. And so I thought a broad stream was education. So I settled into a phys ed degree, and it was probably, in hindsight, one of the better decisions I've made, in the sense that it not only gave me the ability to understand the human body and what goes with it, but also the ability to convey the knowledge. And I think I wasn't getting too wrapped up purely in the textbook, but also as a practitioner. And one thing that the college offered me that was quite unique is the ability to go out and gain coaching certifications and be in front of students and teach all the way through the program, which was great. So it was in 1994 that program started, and then in 97, I had to do a placement. And of all things, at high school, we had a guy come and study at our high school up in Scone, New South Wales, that's in northern New South Wales, who was from New Zealand, and he and I got on really well. And I said, mate, look, if I ever do some overseas travel, I'll come via you first. So I applied for some New Zealand schools to come over and do a teaching section, and was lucky enough to end up at Rathkill College in the Wairarapa. And I got there, dialed this guy's phone number, and he lived in Masterton. so that worked out pretty well. And then in 2000, it was time that I moved out and followed what I had thought was going to be my career path, which was as a strength and conditioning coach, and started out in Wellington with about 80% of my clients were sort of Joe Average or weekend warriors, and there was a very small proportion, I'm talking sort of 10-15% were probably semi-professional, professional athletes of some description. And it was that become another juncture. The juncture was, what do I do next in terms of specialisation? And I took up speed and agility training was where I started to specialise. Over the course of the next 3-4 years, my client base turned around and ended up that I was working with about 15 to 20% of Joe Average and weekend warriors, and moving more into that sort of that semi-professional area. And that was all going really well. And 2000.
So you're zooming through your life. We have a full hour note, so we can slow down a little bit here. But
it gets more interesting.
That teaching piece that you're talking about. A lot of coaches, especially in the amateur era, were teachers, and as you say, learning that different communication styles for different types of people was a good grounding there. How important is that for coaches, and is that kind of missing from some of the, say, the New Zealand Rugby Union or your coaching certificates in your different places? Do they think about that piece, or is it more about technical piece?
Oh, look, I think the New Zealand Rugby is a great example, actually, where there's a lot of emphasis on character, whether it's as a coach or in a selection process. There's a large piece of understanding people and what type of qualities that you've got. So I think Mike Cron was a good one. The scrum doctor at the All Blacks always talks about what sort of stock you have on your farm, and understanding the athlete first. So he's a really good guy in doing that, and got a great way of connecting with people. And I think unless you get that buy-in and connection with athletes, then it's a very, really, really hard slog. So it's just finding those ways in which you can have difficult conversations in better ways, and how people want to be communicated with, and whether it's through technology or infographics or just face-to-face comms, it's still people first. And that is your most important resource. Like I'm involved in a tech company, and as much as I love technology and people know that I love a gadget, it still comes down to those relationships, and having good dialogue. So collecting data is one thing, and having information, but producing insights that can talk about people's character is another.
And I guess there's two sides to it. One is part of that, as you say, about getting the communication in a way that they like to receive information, or they're comfortable and getting information across. But the other one is also different people are motivated in different ways. So some
100%.
people, if you tell somebody you can't do it, they will run through brick walls until they can. There are other people who like to be who respond better if they're told how good they are, and you build up their confidence as well. So it's not just purely about, do I use an infographic or an audio style, is it? It's also a matter of which buttons you press to get people to train the best.
Yeah, look, very much so. And I think even in our latest experiences through COVID, we saw some hurdles or some challenges that actually enabled some of those other different communication mediums to actually be quite effective. And whether that was through digital reporting of wellness applications on people's phones, letting you know how they felt and triggering another conversation, or whether that's just through that connection like we use with Skype and Zoom and the like. So, yeah, definitely very relevant. And I think myself being involved across both men's and women's sports, there is some differences. As you say about running through walls, sometimes some athletes would like to be told to run through the wall and they'll do it, and other athletes like to know, well, why do I run through the wall? There's not a better way. Why don't I try and get over it or run around it, or do I get a ladder? The level of detail through those conversations, it's going to vary. And some athletes like the detail and athletes don't, and coaches are the same.
Yeah, I think the best example I've heard of this is when Eddie Jones took over England's job. He put his arm around players like Mako Vinipola and explained to them, hey, look, I want you to play like a Tongan, and embracing their culture. And then James Haskell, he would give him a mystery shake each morning, protein shake, telling
Yeah,
him
right.
this is what will get you going. And that different form of communication where James Haskell, a guy very much into his fitness and his supplements, whereas the Mako and Vinopola, someone who likes to be part of the family, and seeing how he took those different communication approaches straight away was I found was really interesting.
Yeah, it's finding connections, and I think Graham Lowe, who was the ex All Blacks trainer or S&C, and then he moved on to BMW Oracle Sailing, and he's been with the Western Bulldogs in the AFL. He's had some really unique experiences, and he talked about that connection as well recently on a call that we were on, and he talked about the great Jonah Lomu. How did he make his connection with Jonah? And it was actually around cars. It was Jonah was a big car fanatic, and Lowy, while he only had one car, and I think Lowy said his car didn't really hold a candle to Jonah's cars, but that was their connection, and it enabled other conversations. So, yeah, know the athlete, know the person, and just for me, it's a constant learning. Like there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, so to speak, and there's multiple opportunities to try and take different approaches.
And also, I guess another area that and we are diving down a rabbit hole here, but it's fun. That I think people don't get is, as a sports supporter, you look at things and think, oh, I'd just love to do that. I love sport. Not all professional athletes actually enjoy the sport they play. They just happen to be good at it.
Very good at it.
Yeah, very good at it. And some of them actually have their interests lie elsewhere. I remember a story of an All Black who was at a party, and they were having a chat in the kitchen. They just talked movies all night because he just didn't actually really enjoy rugby. He just happened to be very good at it. Have you found that as well for amongst athletes that you have that sometimes talking about the sport in the downtime is actually detrimental, and actually talking about something else is more important?
Yeah, look, you've got your rugby almanacs and cricket almanac athletes out there that do love just to talk stats and code as long as you can. But you've also got athletes who like to be able to hit a switch and tune out. And by default, like the conversation will eventuate that it goes back to rugby in one shape or form, because that's where we make our connections, whether it's on the grass of a club rugby game in your gumboots or you're sitting at Westpac Stadium. You sort of, by default, you mix in those circles. What's really cool these days is there's a lot of people out there, and the likes of a TJ Petanara would be an example. He's got his pull-up card business there now, and that's really cool to see how he's taken a passion of his and start to develop a business interest. Stacey Waka, now Stacey Fuller, she's just written her first book. It's just awesome to see that they're actually drawing on some of their experiences and enabling other opportunities outside of their games.
Yep, we should getting back onto your opportunities then. The Pulse Netball was your first. Looks like your first sort of big professional team that you worked with there down in Wellington. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, actually, but probably one step before that was so. Come to New Zealand, I started moving more into that semi-professional athlete. I had some exposure with some rugby players. Petone Rugby was one of the first clubs I'd worked with, and Norse Rugby guys will hate me saying that because Norse is where my heart is. They're my club, so to speak, and I come across them later in the piece. But yeah, through Petone, I got a couple of good opportunities to work with their academy and some of their athletes. Some players that were out there at the time, the likes of Tana Umaga and Daniel Ferrani, and those sort of characters were coming through. Alex Talia, really good guys to be around. And I hadn't really travelled a lot extensively. I got to New Zealand, and whilst I thought this was a transit point, I ended up staying. And so it was then that I took off to the United Kingdom and had a good mate over there playing rugby league for St Helens, a guy called Darren Albert in the UK Super League, and moved in with him. And so with my skill set around speed and agility, Albie and a few others connected me through a couple of the clubs. And I started running some speed agility sessions with around St Helens, Bradford Bulls, Salford Reds. And I picked up a gig with an equipment company over there to around speed and agility training. So I was going in doing coaching sessions and using their equipment from the north of England up through Scotland, all the way up to Aberdeen, the top of Scotland. So that was pretty cool. And then I had a working visa, and it was starting to come to its end. And I had a few months left, and used my teaching credentials to go get a gig at Broadgreen School in Liverpool, of all places. And that was a pretty unique experience. So I spoke English, but they spoke Scouser, and I didn't understand a word they said for about 3 weeks, and probably vice versa. But loved it. It was a really cool experience. And a guy there, Tim Wright, was his name, looked after me really well, a PE teacher. We had a good old crack there, which was awesome. And so, again, with time left on the visa, wanted to do some skiing, headed across to France, ended up managing a little 4-star ski chalet for the ski season, which was, I think, December through end of March, something like that.
Yep.
And had a brain fart that it would be a good idea to do a cycle tour. So I called my mum and said, "Mum, can you flick my push bike across to the Perth?" And she ended up getting it to Melbourne. I flew into Melbourne. And I guess that the reason I felt committed to doing that tour is that it come about through doing it for a charity, through the MS. And we got so committed doing it for MS that we sort of had to commit to doing this cycle ride. And the idea was, the girl I was with at the time, I said, "Oh, well, if we're going to do it, why don't we do one from one side of Aussie to another?" And being a Kiwi, she said, "Yeah, that sounds great," not understanding it was about 5,000 kilometres across. But we committed because we'd set it and we dived in, did it for the charity. So got to Melbourne, flew across to Perth, all the way across, thinking, shit, this is a long way. Put the bike together in Perth after not having ridden a bike for about 12 months since being in the UK.
Ooh.
Jumped on 35 kilometres down the road, thought this is not really a good idea. Set the campsite up for the night. Woke up pretty sore. But then over the course of the next 10 weeks, rode my way into fitness. and cycled from Perth down through the Nullarbor Plain, across the Nullarbor, through Adelaide, Melbourne, back up to Sydney, and then through to the Hunter Valley, where Mum and Dad still live. Got back on a plane, had a lot of time to think on that cycle tour. Things don't go too quickly.
You do realise that there is actually a race across Australia that you can take part in now that does that?
Yeah, there's also a plane, I've been told. So, yeah, I think actually the record for that back in the day, was it Opie?
It's
Hubert Opperman, I think he was his name. He was one of the first guys to ride across Australia, and it's a great book. I wish I remember. I think it was Hubert Opperman, and yeah, he was quite a famous cyclist back in the day, and he had the record for a long time, and it's astronomical what those guys and girls can do cycling across. It's impressive, but I wasn't one of them. I think I took 9 days on the bike and 2 days off was sort of my theory. 2 days on the beach somewhere.
Because
yeah, so got back to New Zealand, mate.
That whole endurance cycling is a booming sport at the moment. There's the transcontinental in Europe. There's across America, and there's a whole bunch of them that you can do. So it's another scene you got into. I was wondering if it was a scene you've got, because those guys, yeah, they cycle pretty much 20 hours a day for like a week and then finish it. So yeah, but no, that's not your thing.
No, it's not, mate. Look, I think the biggest day we did was just this side of a 200 Ks, and it's a big day when you're carrying all your own kit, your own water, your own food, your tent, and you're still going to get to the other end of the day and cook a meal on a campfire and set up a tent. They're reasonably long days, but yeah, it's something you'll never forget and pretty rewarding. And look, I do want to finish it. I do want to go around the other side of Australia, up through Brisbane, Townsville, Cairns, back down, but it won't be in the immediate future.
So lots of thinking, and you headed back to New Zealand.
Yep, back to New Zealand, and a lady, Desley Rathel, New Zealand Academy of Sport, that was it back then, or Academy of Sport Central. She gave me a bit of a leg up as well, getting back into high performance sport. So I held a contract with them across some of their national programs, working across the White Sox, the Black Sox, some sailing programs. Ended up getting a gig with the Pulse at the time and the Wellington Firebirds. So I was sort of juggling a lot of different balls in the air, and that sort of took me through to around 2008. And to be quite honest, it sort of just got to that point where I had lots of different reporting lines. The admin was the most difficult part, rather than actually the contact in front of athletes. And look, I loved being part of the Pulse. That was a super cool experience. Some of the coaches I met then, I still stay in touch with, and likewise at the Firebirds. But in 2008, I fortuitously come across the next stage or next chapter was Richard Snow. So Richard, at that point, was establishing a company called VX Sport. And that was athlete monitoring systems, whereby The athlete can wear a little box in their
Are we
bag.
going to come back to the softball? Because I mean, the softball's one I actually want to dive into.
Oh yeah, I go back to softball in 2010 or 11 from memory, so we can go back there. Richard was a long way down the track exploring the idea anyway, and so he brought me on board. And VX Sport had its first product on the shelf around 2008, and the All Blacks and New Zealand Rugby were one of the first to get on board with that. And we had some global competition, but we cut a bit of our own path, and that company still goes today. We've got a few hundred teams around the world, and in the last 6 years, majority of our business is starting to turn towards the US colleges. So a lot of work over there in US college soccer or football, or soccer over there. Football is different again. Hockey, lacrosse. And so that was up and running in 2008. And at the same time, because of those different challenges around the comms, I thought, look, I actually want to take a bit of a break from being day-to-day with teams. And so I went down and set up a little company in Christchurch with Glenn Jenkins called Accelerate. And we'd had programs running for a number of years.
And you spell that XLR8,
that's the one.
Not the other way.
yeah, that's the one. And we'd already written programs and courses, and he had his product range, his gear line of sports equipment. But my focus was really on training and education. So we put those courses online, we digitized those, and they still run today. People can log on and do a speed agility course online. And that was going pretty well. And next minute, earthquakes hit. So we went through the earthquakes, my wife and I, and decided, look, we haven't actually got any real close family or friends down here. We're living over in Sumner, and we moved to Sumner because it was a great little beach town village, and some of the things that we moved there for were no longer there. So we thought we'd move back, and luckily over the course of that time, I was able to retain my work with the Academy of Sports Central, which should then maybe become the New Zealand high performance sport in New Zealand. It was around a similar time, I think. And I was still working with softball, so the Black Sox with Eddie Kalassi. And Eddie, great fella. Really enjoy Eddie. He's a guy that I try and work alongside coaches that I guess have a similar mindset, and guys like Eddie Kalassi is one of those. Eddie Ellison at Norths Rugby would be another. Very lucky to come across Eddie through his son Tamati and work with Norths for a long period of time. And to be honest, those experiences with Norths Rugby and with the Black Sox led to a lot of the things I'm still doing now.
Now, a lot of us think of the All Blacks being the most successful team here in New Zealand. Arguably, the Black Fern Sevens are more successful, but the softball team really have got to rival them, haven't they? I mean, we're talking about a team here that's won the World Championships in 76, 84, 96, 2000, 2004, 2013, 2017, 7 times world champions. That must have been an amazing environment to go into, one that people really don't know much about, and yet is perhaps our best kept secret.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great example of where I'll throw another name out there, Glenn Moore, who's with the Black Ferns 15s now, another coach I relate to really well. But Glenn talks about professionalism is not about money, it's about attitude. And I think the Black Sox at that point in time was indicative of that. And you had a legacy that had been left by Don Tricker, and we know how good Don is about bringing people together and understanding people. And he's got such a diverse background, Don. Now he's over in San Diego with the Padres, but he's been through New Zealand Rugby. He was with the Black Sox and extremely successful, and he would instill those same core values, I'm sure. And that is the fact that the guys a lot of them had families, working full time, and then still having to train, and trying to bring that professional attitude to training and to the game, and having that switch that they could turn on and off to switch in between modes of what was family, what was work, what was softball. And there's been a lot of players in soccer that have managed to play for a long period of time. And I think that says something about the Black Sox as well, as you've got guys involved, Nathan Nukunuku and those sort of fellas that just never wanted to leave probably. And they stay in the team and they create culture and legacy through coherence. And it's the fact they play with each other a lot. They understand how each other plays the game. They understand them as a person as well. And I think that's part of what the Black Sox is. It is a family. And I guess yeah, that's was one of the really attractive things about wanting to be involved with them.
Yeah, and you use a word there that you hear from Ben Darwin and his partners at Gainline Analytics. That coherence piece can be very is very strong. So yeah, definitely. An area that I would like to talk to more people about, because I think it is a fascinating piece. But yeah, great that you had that opportunity. Going back to the VX Sport things, you just touched on this. What we're talking about here is basic systems that have got like heart rate monitors, GPS, that kind of piece, isn't it? So that on that performance piece. So when I go down to watch the Mooloos here train, and they set up this funny series of antennae by the side of the pitch and hand out these boxes to everyone that they slide into their funny man bras that they're wearing. That's the kind of thing you guy. Sorry?
It's a bro, not a man bra.
A bro, sorry. Those are the kind of systems that you guys have been pioneering, isn't it? It's basically.
Yeah, that's right. So inside those little boxes, the technology that's inside them has grown as well. And these days we've got accelerometers measuring force. You've got magnetometers for Earth magnetic field. You've got gyroscopes for rotation. You've got GPS for speed and distance. You've got heart rate. So across those technologies, you're looking at about 1 million data points every 90 minutes per athlete, and you've got about 350 odd or more metrics you can choose from, or metric columns you can choose from. They're all variations of different things, whether it's number of sprints the athlete does, high speed running, heart rate variability, impacts, jumps. There's a whole array of things you can pick depending on the team you're working with, the experience of that team, and so on. So that technology now has been applied across multiple different things. Like we've done work with horse racing. We've done work with Quicksilver and Kelly Slater's crowd was pretty awesome experience. We've done events for Red Bull with downhill mountain biking, and then you've got all your mainstream sports, so to speak, like your rugby and your soccer and your hockey that we continue to work with. And each of them have their own little flavour around how they want to use information, and it's often not just the information, it's all the ingredients in your cake. It's how you bake the cake. So it's trying to get good, clean data, understand what variables or what should the ingredients look like, and then how do we use those ingredients to produce a great product.
And we're talking about here, as you say, a training session could go for, well, we'll take 90 minutes because that's the in a 90-minute training session, a squad of 30, you've got 300 million or 30 million, 300 million data points. Are we getting to the stage now where coaches, I mean, there's one of the issues I talk about in industry is basically overload of information, making it harder to make decisions. Are we getting to that sort of stage with coaches as well, and actually half the job of the analysts now is choosing which bits of data rather than actual relevance, and rather than just sort of capturing data?
Yeah, I think you're right, Paul. I'd like to think we're starting to move past that. And you're right. With the advent of technology, we went through that paralysis analysis stage. And it was just an influx of data. We sometimes were good at digesting, and other times we got indigestion. So it was sort of like trying to work out means in which we could find the critical variables. And I'll use a phrase that Nick Gill, the All Blacks S&C, uses about how do you win more games on Saturday. And so it's trying to understand which of those variables is critical to performance. Of the 350 plus metrics that are available, I'm only looking at probably 5 of those metrics in a live session. And even afterwards, those 5 metrics, the same 5 I present back to the coaches to give them some insights. And if there's a trigger within that information that I think I might want to look at myself or the medical staff later on, then I dig down. And it might only still be 12 out of those 350 plus things that we look at. But even when those 5 things are now presented to us, we're getting into a terminology now that we can say, look, that session was 110% of a game, or that was 70% of a game. And it's that single digit number that doesn't tell you everything, but it starts the conversation, goes back to what we started off with about having those conversations with people so we're on the same page, not just presenting lots and lots of data or pretty pictures. The truth is somewhere in between. It's the gut instinct, it's the black and white data, and then there's the conversation that happens in here. Well, I think we're getting better.
Have we got to the stage yet where we're using AI to sift through the big data and go, you know what, these 10 players, we've had 10 injuries this season, actually, according to the AI, sifted through the X billion data points we've had for pre-season and gone, those 10 guys all did this or all recorded this, but no one else did. Is that a trigger for injury? Have we got to that stage yet?
Yep. So that, and I'm glad you mentioned Darwin before, Ben Darwin, because they are doing some really good stuff in that space. And there's local companies here in New Zealand as well, like Loves Data, Jason Wells and his lads there, that are looking for those cohesive relationships between data sets, whether it's the weather conditions, is it home and away games, is it the physical metrics coming off those units, is it the age of the athlete, how much athletes have played together. The AI aspect of that, to a point, exists in a lot of technologies. That the technologies are learning and evolving, not necessarily automatically, but they are evolving. And the next stage of that is how do they self-learn, as you say, through AI, and then they scan through that data looking for those triggers. And look, we love to think there's a golden bullet we can grab hold of, and it's going to ensure that no athlete ever gets injured, but it's just not the reality. There's so many other variables out there that we take care in trying to manipulate. I won't say control, but we're trying to adjust load, pull and push as we can. We're trying to reduce the risk, but it's still going to exist. And if anyone could come up with a formula to know exactly on what day what athlete was going to perform and who was going to win, then we wouldn't be sitting here, you and I, talking about this.
Very true, very true. And that motivation thing is a big thing. And at the moment, we don't have the sensors in the brain to figure out who is motivated and who's not, or the hormone tracking to decide which person is motivated and who isn't, and knowing. So yes, there are still a lot of variables that we don't measure.
Yeah,
now,
yeah, absolutely.
You've got you've got 12 years with New Zealand Rugby that I'm just going to jump straight over, unfortunately, because I'm already running out of time. I would love to go back to that. But I guess one of the things I've seen through most of this is that, and actually the New Zealand Rugby one's going to be a bit different, is you started out as an individual sports person, as you said, playing like athletics, tennis, a bit of rugby league as well, a bit of team thing, but a lot of individual sports, and yet most of your work appears to have been with teams rather than individuals, which I think has been an interesting change. You did mention that on the tech side you're doing some work with individuals, but generally it's been teams, hasn't it? Is that just a matter of what opportunities are there, or just you prefer working with teams?
It's a bit of self-evolution as well, probably. I would say when I was a young sports person, I was pretty pig-headed and quite liked to be in charge of my own race. And then through my involvement with teams, and that was a lot of it was cricket and rugby league, but cricket particularly, I love the team atmosphere, and I love learning more about the team in itself. And when I come to New Zealand, quite frankly, after coming from rugby league background, rugby league was a dirty word, and by default, I moved into rugby union. And a couple of critical moments happened within rugby union where guys like Graham Lowe did give me a gig with the ABs, doing some of their regional speed and agility sessions back when he was involved, which was a great leg up. The guys like Tamati Ellison I mentioned, I was doing some one-on-one stuff with him that come about through an article he'd seen in the paper about me, and Tamati was always looking to be proactive, and he got me involved, and I got working alongside Eddie Ellison with the Norse boys and had great success there. We had a pretty unstoppable club for a period of time when you've got Jerry Collins and Robbie Fruin and TJ Petanara and Tamati and his brothers, Jacob and Leon, and all those boys were at the club. It was a pretty healthy, strong club. And then probably I stayed in rugby as a result of a guy called Richard Scully, who I was in Dubai doing a speed agility course coaching, and he called me one night at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I just landed, jet lagged, picked up the phone. Skulls, what's up? JT, I'm looking for a recommendation or some ideas around who might take on a S&C role with the Black Ferns. I said, no, I'll be keen. He goes, no, I'm not asking you to do it. I said, no, I'm into it. Yeah. So that was in 2013, and I'm still with them today. But that team, the sense of team I've got with them, and Norse is the other one. So going from Norse to the Black Ferns, there were some really similar traits. It was about more than being, for lack of a better word, it was more than money. The money was not the inspiration. The money, the family was the inspiration. To see change, the environment that Norse created through guys like Eddie and that group of players, you could see it influencing the community. You could see it influencing the way they played. And the Black Ferns were the same. You walk in there and you could see that that team, the way they connect with people outside of rugby and people they're inspiring is something it's stayed with me. And it was the reason I wanted to be involved. And then probably since 2017 when they won the World Cup. That's a great game to go and rewatch if no one's watched a game of women's rugby or what wants to watch. But that was a real pinnacle shift because it coincided around the same shift we're seeing in the Olympic Sevens. So those two things combined saw women's rugby start to really take off, which I'm pretty excited about.
Yes, and another time, because I'm already running out of time, that I'd love to sit down and talk with you about how they're going to, how strength and conditioning is going to work when you've got the Farah Palmer Cup running through this year. You then have basically 6 months of no elite rugby and running into the Rugby World Cup. At the moment, there's only going to be club rugby in there. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting battle for you. But I say, don't have time to talk about that now, unfortunately. Another one the fascinating one here for me is that working with referees, again,
yep.
a bunch of guys who we can't survive without, but are the solo men in a team sport, probably having to train on their own midweek, all that kind of thing, and how they stay motivated, being perhaps sometimes seen as the enemy the whole time as well. So again, another topic I'd love to dive into, but we've got to talk about your current project, which is down there in Wellington, which is this campus of innovation and sport that you've got down there, which is great. Are you taking a campus that hasn't been used for 14 years, so how did the idea come about to have this to have this campus, and how do you go about buying several acres and
18
acres and what looks like about 10 or so buildings, so you're becoming like a property magnate overnight?
No, look, I'll pass the property magnate title on to Malcolm Gillies, who's my business partner and the owner of the campus. Malcolm is a Upper Hutt stalwart, sport tragic, extremely motivated guy who I've created a real connection with, and very excited about what we're going to do down here. And it actually has been laying dormant for longer than that. It was in 2001, roughly, that it was a polytech that shut down overnight, and a series of them merged together. So it was in sort of around that 2014-15 period that Malcolm and his partner, Kevin Melville, purchased the campus. And this discussion started around what it might become. And it was, I'm sure everyone has their own theory on it, but it could have been residential real estate. It could have been a conference venue. It could have been hotels. It could have been anything you like. But Malcolm, to this day, and I truly believe it's the right thing to do to put this into a sports campus. And I think it's only been highlighted more so what our strategy is and our theory is around how this campus is going to operate through COVID and what we're seeing in the sports environment currently. And in simple terms, what that means is we believe the teams need to be operating more in a club structure together, so that the likes of the Phoenix, Wellington Lions, and New Zealand Baseball are our foundation members, that they will work, collaborate and share certain things. That means we're building 1,000 square metre gym, which none of the clubs could do individually. But when you build it at a scale that 3 of them can use and have exclusivity over for periods of time, then it works. Having dedicated covering facilities, having dedicated video analysis rooms are all things that are nice to have if you had the money and the resource, but exclusively or individually, they couldn't do it. So this idea Malcolm had started off with a garden shed, and it quickly morphed into something that's quite different. And we've not gone without our hurdles and challenges, but we've had some really proactive and understanding partners through the journey. And it was only about 3 weeks into COVID that we had our overseas funding, $30 million, pulled out of the project. So as we walked off the site at the start of COVID, we were nimble enough to start looking at other opportunities or how we keep this thing going. And we're hoping for some good news regarding the Shovel Ready program the government announced to get this thing back online. And one way or the other, it's going to happen. So we're going to make this thing happen, that we want it to be a place where not only is it about high-performance sport, but we use the technology and the infrastructure to make a difference in the community, to make a difference in the business and education sector. Education particularly is a great conduit for sport. And we think there's a lot of things that can be done that we can use as a vehicle that we can use in our program as well to enable athletes or students that may learn in a different means? How can we use sports data to teach math? How can we use principles of the accelerometers coming off the GPS units or the VX units that we can use for teaching forces and contact and impacts and jumps, that sort of thing. So, mate, it's hugely exciting. It's easily one of those things you'll only get a chance to do once. So we've spent a lot of time doing it.
So obviously, so one side of it is being the home, being the training home and the Monday to Friday home of 3 professional sports teams initially. Well, actually, I'm not sure if baseball is professional, but anyway, 3 high performance sports teams initially. But it's more than just that. It's how many more sports do you think you can take on, or and is it homing them both with hotels, and or is it just a kind of day, a 9 to 5 kind of home?
Yeah, we've got 350 single rooms on the campus already, which is the old student accommodation. So they've been renovated to a standard that's good for age group teams and short stays. And we are going to build a new 50 square metre rooms on site as well for an athlete village. So we can have professional teams, the likes of the Black Ferns, come and stay with us and other teams across the globe. And we're super cognizant to the fact that there's a real need to act in a holistic way. So that's both in terms of mental health, that's both in terms of opportunities outside of your game. So a proper academy structure will be able to be facilitated because we've got accommodation and food on site and the diversity in our facility. So we're spending a lot of emphasis on the recovery part of it. And that's come about through a survey we conducted across over 30 other venues around the globe, the likes of Manchester United, Paris Saint-Germain, West Coast Eagles, Manly Sea Eagles. We looked at what they were doing in their facilities being world class, and we're really confident we'll stack up really well. But it come through as a theme that the part around recovery was a big chunk of your puzzle. We're really going to go hard at that. But an exciting partnership for us is one we've struck with NTT. It's one of the world's biggest technology infrastructure companies, and the way in which they're looking at sport now is super exciting for us. Like, they're the guys that do the analytics you see on Tour de France, or the data is captured and they produce it. The analytics, that's them. What they're doing in the business world or commercial world that can be applied to sport is something that we want to latch onto and learn from. So we've struck a partnership with those guys to try and come in, look at the technologies that are involved in sport. How do we bring them together? Can there be an application outside of the team itself? And we believe in things like education that there will be.
So you're looking at, so we've got the hosting of the permanent home. We've got temporary homes. We've got what sounds to me like an R&D section as well. With COVID happening, we've also got these situations where, for example, the Sal's NBL needed a facility where they could play and kind of create a bubble for their teams. Is obviously that's a kind of a new idea, but would there be scope for that, for hosting games without audiences if required, and have holding kind of putting a little dome over the top of the whole area, as it were, and kind of as well, or is that not? Are we too?
No,
too
you're right. You're on the right path, mate. Without giving away too many trade secrets just in a second, it's something that we are putting some time into. And again, that's where those guys at NTT are an enabler for us through the video tracking, the smart tracking, the self-tracking technology that's out there now, through the wearable devices and those types of things. We can enable a different experience. And we're not thinking just mainstream. The likes of esports has exploded. We're in good conversations with those guys around how do we create esports academies and give value to them coming down from the Northern Hemisphere and spending time with us. We don't intend on trying to want to take any business or compete with any business here locally. Therefore, we're not trying to take anything away from the stadium. In fact, Shane Harmon and the guys down there have been really supportive, and we intend on hopefully being a benefit to them by having teams attracted to here to want to play at the stadium. We see our venue as being something that can be used for pre-seasons and training, and we want to try and leverage off the other great facilities around Wellington and New Zealand to try and make this a destination, not just in terms of local sport, but a destination for sports tourism as well.
And yeah, that's the whole camera tracking piece is fantastic. You don't actually one of the big costs of televising is the outside broadcast units, which require several vans, a team of 20 to 30 odd people at least. Whereas actually nowadays, what you can do is you can put one camera on halfway. You can use technologies like Spork to have a remote commentary that means that it's in sync with the videos and all of that kind of piece. And yeah, you don't actually, in theory, you can have a setup where someone just flicks a switch and no one else has to be there. So
correct. Yeah, that's right. And I think there's Grant Elliott, the ex Black Cap. He's now general manager at a company called MAR, My Action Replay, and it's exactly that. And their scope is that they will set up a fixed camera. They've got the ability for mums and dads to use the application on their phone to code tries and scoring shots and things like that on their phones, and a scorecard that then gets overlaid into the broadcast or the stream. And I think what COVID has also done is shown people that, or brought some of those technologies or accelerated them further across the line. So there's, in some ways, COVID's going to be friendly to us. We've gone out and thought about some new opportunities we hadn't maybe thought of because of it. But in other ways, there are some of these things we're talking about now, the likes of the Swift application for cycling and joining remote cycling training, that we thought we would like to have been the first into the New Zealand market to try and do those sort of things, that we won't be anymore. But it's also given people an attitude that, hey, these things are available and are okay to use. So we're quite excited about the fact that people are getting exposure to that sort of stuff now too.
Yeah, it's amazing. So for those who don't know about Zwift, it's indoor trainers with basically a TV screen in front of you pretending to ride. Someone like Matt Heyman used that when coming back from injury and went on to win Paris-Roubaix, for example. So with when he came back and had like only about 2 weeks on the road and went straight on to win a race. So it's really amazing now, these kind of technologies. I mean, another one I've heard of that Exeter Chiefs are using is a zero gravity running machine. So if you
Alter G, yep.
So if you've got a bust knee or a bust ankle, when you're coming back from surgery, you can train on that to keep your fitness up.
So we've got an Alter G on order for the campus, and we've got a underwater treadmill as well for different reasons. But yeah, so those are the sort of things, and that's where we're going to be partnering with local tertiary institutions, and we want to be pretty agnostic. We are talking with the likes of AUT, Waikato, Victoria, Massey, around how we could be a satellite program for them to come and use some of the specialist technologies, equipment, experiences for their students, come in and as an athlete also have the ability to study one of their programs while still playing professionally. So it's that type of thing, and the equipment you gave there is a great example of a piece of kit that's actually pretty pricey, and it's something that we want to be able to have at our facility that can be utilised by a lot of people.
And do you see yourselves as being the only one in New Zealand, or is it one that you see where that actually Auckland has one as well for like Auckland, for the Warriors, for the netball teams up there? There's another one in Hamilton, another one down in Christchurch, another one in Dunedin, or do you see yourself as being sort of the only one in New Zealand?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways in which that could go for sure. Well, actually, there's three ways. One, nothing happens, nothing changes is number one. But
and then number two, bust and we have no sport.
Number two, I think, is the attitude where this could be replicated potentially around New Zealand, and that would be a great thing for local communities as well. I don't know that because of some of the limitations around land and resource and collaboration, whether those things will happen. They're not a straightforward jigsaw to put together. But I think there was an article written on Stuff earlier in the week around the mega franchise concept, which I think can work. And that would be the idea where, like in Europe, you might have a rugby club that also has a water polo team, or you might have the netball franchise as the AFL team in Australia. They come together and that sort of thing. I can see happening. And I'd be stoked if some of the things we're introducing here could act as a blueprint or some learnings for that to be a vehicle for other people to take that forward. That'd be great. But yeah, we're certainly playing it down the middle. We want to partner and collaborate with as many people as we can. We're not looking to compete, and we do think this is a pretty unique opportunity within New Zealand that hopefully will attract a global audience.
Yeah, the problem with that, the whole mega franchise thing is up in Europe, the governing bodies don't own the teams or really, whereas down here, New Zealand Rugby still owns over 50% of every franchise. So they end up having, so they have the controlling vote. It's very difficult to and I think it's probably something similar in netball, but I'm not sure. But it's very difficult to have a mega franchise if you can't actually own the franchise. So yeah, it's going to require a mind shift by some of the sporting bodies down here around.
I think you hit on the right point. It's where if there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
so I think you're right. Those hurdles aren't minuscule. There are things that need to be jumped over. But I'd like to think that the conversations are at least on the table.
Yep, they're starting it. And yeah, I mean, FC Barcelona is another famous one. Yeah, the basketball team, and we have all those leagues here. I mean, we have a professional or a semi-professional basketball team. We have a semi-professional netball. We have all the leagues here. It's just a matter of, as you say, getting them all to play. And also, not only do you have the synergy across the HR and stuff, but also marketing, and also if we change the Chiefs to be called I've gone blank now as to which is the netball team in
Magic.
They have plenty, but the Magic. So yeah, maybe we have they have the same name. Will fans become fans of the Magic 5 different teams rather than just one, which I think could be there's room for collaboration, whereas I think a lot of people at the moment are still competing out there.
Yeah. No, look, I agree, mate. I think it's a conversation that's not without its hurdles, but yeah, got to have it.
So the date I see is the 2021. So that's only 6 months away now. Then for you to open is
well, 2021 could be 18 months away yet.
Well, true.
But mate, look, we were initially aiming at March, so Q1 of next year. That was our original timeline. It's all obviously pending getting the funding back in line, which we're confident we can do. And then at that point forward, we've probably got about a 15-month runway would be realistic. But I know how Malcolm operates, and if it can happen faster, it will. So it's exciting, mate. And it's again, we want to do this right. We're not going to compromise on quality if we can't get the level of funding that we need in one go. We're not going to go back and say this is not a world-class facility. It has to be. It has to be unique. It has to be fit for purpose. If you ask Malcolm, he's given me one job, and that is to make it fit for purpose. So I'll do that. And yeah, like I say, we're super excited and getting great support from every sector, whether it's education or sport.
But it's also a thing that you can build modularly, right? So you can start putting in some of the recovery pieces with maybe finding the gym is too expensive, or you can bring in like a float tank company, for example, and give them a piece of or a home and put those pieces together. It doesn't have to be a buy it all in. It doesn't have to be a big bang approach.
To a point. Yeah, to a point, because we're repurposing part of the original campus for a lot of the administration and change rooms and things like that. But the actual sports hub is a completely new build.
Right.
So the gym, the 70 by 50 metre indoor green room or training space, the recovery facilities are all very bespoke. So an example where you could modulise it would be the new accommodation, as an example, or in the retrofit building or the repurposed building, we might start by building 4 change rooms rather than 8. That sort of thing. So it's the benefit, I guess, is that Malcolm's very good at as well as getting people in areas around him that have a very specific skill set. And so he's I rely on him hugely in what you're talking about and how do we make this commercially viable. And likewise, he's putting a lot of trust in me and making sure it's fit for purpose.
Brilliant. It's been absolutely fascinating talking with you around all those pieces. And we've already the final piece. So during COVID, obviously you sat down, but you also put yourself forward to help with the We Are Matariki. We Are Manaki. Sorry, being English and being dyslexic, I find married words and specific words very difficult. I do try though, folks. Volunteering your time to help other people set up their small SMEs as well, haven't you? Yeah,
look, it's something that came across my radar looking at Andy Hamilton, who's involved with Icehouse before, and watching and seeing how that was sort of evolving. Artie Savio put his name to it and seeing some of what they were trying to achieve there, and it resonated with me around small business and particularly where I still am and where I come from with setting up BX Sport and Accelerate. Some of the challenges back then that I faced, I would have loved to have knocked on someone's door at the time and thought, well, what do you know? Like, there's no point reinventing the wheel. What's the best way to do this, and taking people's advice on it. And I think COVID was a real catalyst for that, to try and reach out to people that were struggling to either sustain their business or pivot and change what they were delivering. And so didn't take a great deal of thought that when the opportunity come up to work with Monarchy on that I'd offer some time. And realistically, people go on the website, they ask questions in streams, and I've been appointed to a couple of different streams around technology and wellness, some of my skill sets, and when that question comes across my desk, you might have 4, 5, 6 different experts jump on there and put some feedback in and start that conversation. And I think for the people asking the questions, that the responses, some will be with a grain of salt, and some will be, that's a great idea, and some they'll park, and that's cool. It's actually just trying to filter out how we can help. And it's really cool that Andy and his team at Monarchy are doing such a great job and getting a huge hit rate and lots of questions coming in, which is cool.
Yeah, I've asked a couple of questions there, and the responses have been, you're unlikely to get funding in that space, Paul. So unfortunately, which hasn't been particularly helpful. Well, it has been helpful in letting me know that actually I shouldn't spend too much time and effort trying to get something when it's unlikely to eventuate. But yeah, no, great little resource if you are if you're an SME and looking for a little bit of help.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure. Everybody, please do like the Facebook page. Also, check out New Zealand Sports Radio. You can listen to us on the go on all your favorite podcatchers on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Acast, and all of those wonderful places.